Hmm? Ah!
Oh. But, that doesn't always come across in a business-like first interaction or two,
When's the last time you laughed out loud?
When I laughed out loud?
Yeah.
Oh, every day. I love for humor to be a big part of my life. So I'm always consuming humor in different aspects and also trying to, put it out there too. I mean, this has been actually quite a serious conversation compared to many that I do, but that's just the nature of where it went.
Yeah. Podcast Junkies, episode 87. If you are new to the show, this is the one where we talk to podcasters from all across the land, this land, that land, across the pond, across the sea, people that are just amazing, have fantastic personalities, are super engaging, are funny as all heck, and have fantastic podcasts to boot. And that for me is the recipe for the type of personality that I want to engage with and that I want to have conversations with. So that's why I created this show. It's Podcast Junkies. And my name is Harry Duran. I'm the host. And every Monday-ish, I release a new episode with of a conversation that I had. And this week is no different. I get to speak to Andrew Locke, who has a interview called a video podcast called Help My Business. My brain's scattered for some reason, so bear with me here. We met at a conference, as I am apt to do lately, in Las Vegas several weeks ago. We met through a mutual friend, Matthew Kimberly, and we started talking podcasting, and he's got a show that he's been doing since 2008. He's originally from the UK. He's a really funny guy, and his show, you really have to check it out. It's really entertaining, and it's actually got me thinking about possibly introducing some video aspects at some point with Podcast Junkies or with another podcast from my business. But I really think we're at the cusp of something happening with podcasting where the technology and the bandwidth and the ease of recording video, we're getting to this perfect storm where I think you're going to start seeing more and more of them. And he's been doing it, like I said, since 2008. So he's learned a lot along the way. He's a former BBC cameraman. And you'll hear the story of how he was just immersed in the teachings of Dan Kennedy and Yannick Silver. And he was always a student of business. And as a result, he was working for a prominent celebrity in the UK who eventually moved here, and he kept working with them, but eventually he went on to do his own thing. And now he's got a really successful business and a really successful show. And I was just really happy to meet someone who's doing video really, really, really well. The other person that comes to mind is a past guest, Jason Stapleton, who is also has a kick-ass program. He was episode 28. You can go check that out. And so really fun conversation. I'm always interested in talking to people from other cultures as well. So he tells us a little bit about growing up in the UK and that how his experiences there colored where he ended up. In case you missed last week's episode, we spoke to Paul Culligan, who is another podcast veteran. I love talking to old school OG podcasters. And Paul is another engaging personality, host of the Podcast Report. And he has some stories as well. He lived on an army base in Germany for 8 years. And as you can imagine, stories that go along with that as well. You can hear about the crazy place, not the crazy place, but the unexpected place where he celebrated his prom, which I thought was funny. So go check that out. That is episode 86, the one previous to this one. So enjoy my conversation with Andrew. And stay tuned at the end of the episode for the retention hashtag and a bit of information about our sponsor, Fancy Hands. Have fun. So, Andrew Locke, thank you for taking the time to join us on Podcast Junkies today.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
And it's only to think we only met probably a week ago, was it, right?
That's right. It's funny how these things happen, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. For the benefit of the listener, we met at a mutual friends event called the 90 Day Year, Todd Herman. And we actually met through Matthew Kimberly.
That's right. Yeah, Matthew, another Brit who actually lives in Malta now. And I met him at another event where we were both speaking.
So is that something that happens to you? And we can touch upon your traveling a little bit later, but is that something that happens as a result of now going to conferences and, maybe as a speaker, but also as an attendee, that you find that that's really where you get to make connections with people?
Very much so. It's interesting because I'm an introvert and it takes great effort for me to sort of talk to people in that kind of setting where I don't know them, whereas perhaps an extrovert kind of enjoys that process. It really takes an effort for me, but I found that by making that effort and getting outside my comfort zone, good things happen. Like we met, and business is all about relationships, isn't it? It's more about who you know rather than what you know. So it's definitely worth stretching yourself if you are an introvert. If I'm at a party and it's just a party, typically I'll be the one in the corner, talking to the people that I already know.
But I think would you agree that you found that some of the best or most interesting connections or relationships that happened as a result of you getting out of your comfort zone?
Oh yeah, the effort always pays off for sure.
And so we had an interesting conversation when we were introduced, because we started talking podcasting, and then you brought up the subject of video podcasts, which I thought was interesting because not a lot of people I know are doing them. I know a couple of friends that are, but I'm constantly thinking about the stat that Rob Walsh of Libsyn talks about on his podcast, The Feed, about the top 200 podcasts, only one's video. But then you started telling me about your show, and it's called Help My Business, and you've been doing it since 2008.
That's right.
And I actually did go back and see your very first one. So.
Oh my goodness.
So there's some stuff we could talk about there. So
sure.
So for
someone, see the evolving nature of it. Yeah, my decision to do video was based on a couple of reasons. One was that my original background was a BBC cameraman and freelance work too, and so that was what I knew how to do, and so it wasn't complicated as it is for so many people. That was one reason. Another reason was strategically, I felt that it would be a way to stand out from the crowd because most podcasts are audio. So, like anything, there's pros and cons. I think Apple doesn't do a good job at all of promoting video podcasts because there's some... they tend to focus on audio, and even some apps for the App Store don't even allow you to download a video podcast.
Yeah.
There's one very popular one. I forget the name of it, but
Overcast.
Oh, but that's right. My show doesn't even come up in there because it's only for audio. So, I think that's a real shame because, of course, if you have video, then you can listen to the audio anyway. Yeah. So, but you can't do that with audio. But yeah, that was the main thing for me was, one, I knew how to do it. And two, I felt that it was a way to stand out from the crowd because just inherently there's not that many video podcasts by comparison to audio. But the other side of the coin, I think, is to consider is the fact that Apple really hasn't advocated video podcasts. So that's something that I've been kind of more aware of as time goes on. And that's why I've adopted other channels in addition to Apple for making people aware that the show is available.
Well, the beauty of it is that once you have something in video format, you then have your choice of platforms on which to
Right.
to promote it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
and
that's a good thing.
And so in the beginning, you started strictly as a video podcast, but since that time, it's now, well, 2008. So it's been quite some time that you've been doing it. So have you now begun syndicating that content onto other video platforms?
Yeah, it's syndicated on a lot of other platforms. And of course, platforms come and go too. So, if I think back over the years, it's been on platforms like Vidler, Blip, oh crumbs, a bunch of other ones that have come and gone too. So I just try and sort of keep my ear to the ground as to what platforms are out there, and anything that people are using, I want to be on that platform. So
you said, given that you were a cameraman for the BBC, in some ways that might have made the transition a little bit easier, but it's not a direct move to be a BBC cameraman and then to go to be a video podcaster. So what was can you talk a little bit about what that learning curve was like?
Yeah, it's a good point. Technically, of course, I knew what to do. But, there was this whole journey, which I talk about in one of the episodes. I think it's episode 178 or somewhere around there. It's on the homepage anyway at Help My Business, or it's on the About page, I should say, at helpmybusiness.com. And so I made the move from England to the States in 2003. And at that point, I was sort of searching for what I was going to do next, because I'd been managing a celebrity in England who was sort of come to the latter part of his career, and he basically wanted to retire and I wanted to do other things. So it was a transitional period, and I came across a couple of guys that were kind of heavily into teaching business, particularly online. One was Yannick Silva, and the other one was more sort of general marketing, Dan Kennedy. And I got involved in their trainings and really immersed myself in it. And I realized that they definitely, I resonated with what they taught. A lot of what they taught, I already kind of had been thinking about myself. And so there was an alignment there where I thought, I found my home, as it were. I found my place where I belong. And through a kind of a process of studying their materials, I realized that one of the opportunities that I wanted to pursue was creating my own information products and trainings for other people to benefit from. And one of the ways that cropped up that was sort of emerging at that time was video podcast, because audio had been going for some years, but really this was the infancy of video online. Because if you remember back then, there was video, but it was, if you went to a web page, it would be like a postage stamp size video, and it would be all very kind of jerky. And YouTube wasn't even born at that time. So YouTube came along a year or two later. So that tells you kind of what was going on with video at that point. So it was very emerging. But I realized at that time that, because video is so powerful in terms of engaging people and also persuading people, I knew that it would not be a fad. I knew absolutely, positively, without a doubt, that it would be here to stay, and it would grow and grow and grow to the point where, video would be everywhere online. And I saw, I think there's a big opportunity here, because I know the technical side of how to make good quality video and engaging programs too, which is another side of things. There's a lot of video that is boring to watch, but that's not going to help anybody if they don't want to watch it. So I knew how to do that, but then there was like you said, there was this other side of it, which was, for me to become a presenter. That was a big, bold move, and I felt, I'm passionate about the topic of business, and I'd already had a lot of experience because I was already managing a celebrity at this point. And so I knew marketing myself, and I knew how to grow a business. I'd done that very successfully, but I hadn't, and I had done some live presentations, but this was another step. So it wasn't like I went straight from being a cameraman to in front of the camera. There was a kind of a transitional period of some years where I started doing some speaking, public speaking and things like that. But even so, my first efforts in front of the camera are quite crude. If I look back at my first episodes.
Well, it's interesting because we started off the conversations and talking about how you're an introvert, and if anyone were to watch your your recent episodes, they would say there's not an introverted bone in your body.
No, well, that's an interesting thing too, because it's one of the things that I've discovered is that I am and I have to be a situational extrovert, and certainly I was already used to being a situational extrovert when I presented live, because no one wants to kind of, see. An introvert is a deep thinker, so that's not very interesting to watch
on stage.
So I like any of these skills, it was something that I developed over time, and I realized, the thing that makes an enjoyable presentation is, well, a couple of things. One, if you have fun with it, the audience will have fun. Also, if you be yourself rather than trying to be someone else, that will resonate with them too, because you'll naturally be more authentic and likable. And also, passion and enthusiasm is contagious. So if they see you being really heartfelt, passionate about the topic, then they will resonate with that, and they will respond to that, and they will give out energy too. So it really stemmed from my experience in public speaking, in speaking in front of live audiences. So in many ways, doing it in the comfort of my studio where it's just me, it is actually much easier because, there's no pressure. I get to do multiple takes if I want to. I get to, to kind of take my time and redo things if I need to. So it was definitely a journey. And like I said, the first episodes make me cringe when I watch them now, because it has evolved, and I have, like any skill, I've become better at it.
It's like it's what they tell podcasters too. The best time to start a podcast is yesterday, and the second best time is today, because there is going to be that learning curve, and you're not going to like your voice. And in your case, you may not like how you look on camera, to add even more pressure to it. But I can only imagine how much you've grown along the way in your in the show and in your presentation. A
huge amount. I've grown in the presentation style, and I've also grown in terms of understanding an audience, understanding what they want and how they want it. There's a lot of elements that go into it. Like I said earlier, there's many people that know their subject very well, but they just don't present very well. And it is a skill that can be learned. If you look at someone like, most people have seen the presentations that Steve Jobs did with Apple. It's a very distinctive style, but it was certainly not accidental. That was very, it was very, created. It was deliberately, strategically put together, and the result was very good. For that reason, there was a deep understanding of how to present. So one of the biggest things being that people want to be entertained.
Yeah.
There's the most podcasts and most videos online have some type of educational content. If it's designed to be educational, then it will have the educational component. That most people have that down pretty well. However, the missing ingredient for most presentations, whether it's audio or video, in my experience and perception, has been and continues to be that most people don't have the entertainment aspect, because when you combine those two, education with entertainment, it gives you a very engaging, high level of engagement with the viewers.
So you mentioned you were influenced by folks like Dan Kennedy and Yannick Silver, but I wonder, on the presentation front, did you learn that from them as well, or were there other folks that you were watching in the space as you were entering?
Many people, again, working with this celebrity in England, that was kind of my fundamental mentorship and being immersed in that environment, because he had a very, very he presented a very popular show on the BBC for about 15 years. The closest I would compare it to is someone like Jimmy Fallon today.
Okay.
So it was an entertainment show, and it was extremely, extremely popular. It was the biggest show at the time. And I learned an immense amount about the nuances of creating content that people want, that they resonate with, through working with this celebrity and working on that show. One of the things that he innovated, among many things that he innovated, was prior to his show being popular on the BBC, actually every show on the BBC and the other channels, actually, because remember, in England, we only had, when I grew up, there was 3 channels. There was BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV, independent television. That was it.
Yeah.
Over the years, they expanded to 5 channels, and then, of course, cable and satellite came in. But when I grew up, it was 3 channels. So, we had enormous viewing figures for those 3 channels, because that's all there was. But every show started with some kind of title sequence, which would usually run about 30 seconds, and then the show would introduce, or the presenter would come on screen. Well, Paul, the guy who I managed, realized that when those opening credits came on the screen, that was an opportunity for people to kind of flip through the channels, because there was no compelling reason to watch. And so one of the things that he innovated, which actually has gone around the world since he innovated it, was he started his show with him on camera doing some little kind of magic trick, very close up. And it would immediately grab people's attention. And then, when he did the big kind of reveal, then it would go into the opening credits. And so it would hook people in, and then they would stay watching. And, that's an example of something that I adopted very strategically in my show. So, my first words are, in every episode, coming up in this episode, and I talk about what's going to be in the show. And then I have the opening sequence, just like a TV show. But the difference with my opening sequence is it's much shorter. Over the years, opening sequences, opening animations and title sequences have become shorter on TV. But online, with a lot of people having a lower attention span, I think that will change, and it is changing over time. But right now, it's lower compared to watching a traditional TV show. I made sure that my opening sequence is a lot shorter, so it's about 10 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So, I pull people in with what's coming up in the episode, very short establishing sequence for the title of the show, and then I'm straight into the content. So there's a lot of things like that. There's every aspect of the show has been carefully thought out to maximize engagement and to make it also entertaining and fun for the viewer to watch. So, a lot goes into it that most people wouldn't consciously be aware of. But, for all these things are for good reason.
And that comes from the benefit of having done the show for so many years. You get feedback on what works and what doesn't, and what resonates with your audience, right?
Right. Yeah. It's like I said earlier, it's a process of continual evolution. I also don't want it to become stale. So when you've been doing a show for 8 years, you want to continually improve it and add things, and make sure that the viewers are surprised and delighted rather than just delivering exactly what they expect, because that can quickly become mundane.
I would imagine it's a fine line, because if they continue to come back to watch your show, there's an aspect of you, your personality, your content that they want to see week in and week out. But then, to your point, you have to slightly, keep them off balance, so they don't know exactly what they're. 90% is going to be consistent Andrew, but then he might have a different hat on this. This show.
It is. That's a very good point. It is a fine line. A couple of examples of things that have evolved. One was, originally the show was, when it first launched, for the first 5 or 6 years, I think, it was called "Help, My Business Sucks." And, of course, that was a very quirky name, and it was a good name to begin with because it definitely caught people's attention. It's very fun and quirky. And as soon as someone would hear that name, they immediately got the sense that, hey, this is a fun show. This is quirky. This is something a little unusual. And it also says exactly, what the show is about. But I found over the years of developing and evolving the show that it was tending to attract a proportion of the audience were people that I didn't want to attract into my business, because it is a business after all. And they are the people that are either complete beginners or people that, where they really are struggling, because neither of those types of individuals are the ones that I actually serve. The show has always been designed around presenting more advanced, intermediate and advanced business building methods for someone who already has a business, who has had some level of success that wants to take it to the next level. Those are the people that I wanted to work with, that do want to work with, and those are the people that I enjoy working with. So that was one change that I made. Another change that I made was, for the first few years, to go with the kind of quirky style, I wore a T-shirt my wardrobe, as it were, was a T-shirt with a different slogan on it. So for the first over 100 episodes, every episode had a different T-shirt on it. So, which was fun, but I evolved past that. And I also ran out of ideas for slogans on the T-shirts. And, I felt that it was time to move on to a different look. Just as fashion changes, the same thing applied here. I felt like that it served its purpose and it was time to move on. So I moved on to a more of a kind of a casual shirt. And now I actually wear a suit.
Yeah.
Because the show is now modeled after the style of The Daily Show with, or what was with Jon Stewart.
Sure.
And those types of shows, the presenters wear suits. And so, suit and tie. And so that's a natural decision that came about as a result of me having a deep understanding of where I wanted to take the show.
The UK obviously has a very rich history with TV and even with comedy. And I'm wondering if there were some influences that you had growing up from TV that you watched that, although maybe you don't copy them directly, are inspiring you in some way.
Oh, absolutely. So I grew up watching this guy that I ended up managing, and he used a lot of comedy in his performance. Very, very fun, very playful. There was a comedian also by the name of Tommy Cooper, who was extremely well loved in England. And so, yeah, for sure, there were influences like that where they shaped who I wanted to be. But at the same time, the guy who I managed gave me some very important advice when I started doing the show. And he said, make sure that you are true to who you are. And he said, be very careful not to fall into the trap of imitating or copying someone else, because you'll always be a poor copy of them, and it will always be obvious that that's what you're trying to do. So he said, you are a unique individual. You are the best one of you there is. So while it's fine to have influences, I do believe, and this is what I teach others too, is you should develop your own style, and it will develop. It doesn't come automatically. It takes time, actually. Like certain catchphrases that I have on the show now have come about through me just doing the show so often, and the viewers get to know these little catchphrases, which is a cool thing, because they repeat them back to you when they see you live and meet you and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's that. I think ultimately, although I was influenced for sure, you naturally are, whether you like it or not, you're going to be influenced. I also was very conscious of the fact of it's important to develop your own personality and style that is unique to you.
Have you done any live versions of the show?
I haven't. Well, actually, I have done a couple of live episodes where I had a studio audience, which was actually enormous fun because a lot of it is humor based. To get the live reaction is phenomenal, and you really feed off of them. I can see why comedians do what they do, because it's really an amazing thing to get an instant reaction when you tell jokes and so on. I've done live recorded shows too, where I've actually taken the show to different places. Like I've done one at Disney World. I've done one on the road in Australia. I've done one from a cruise ship, and a whole bunch of other places. But those were live recorded shows. But yeah, actually I'd forgotten that I'd done them, but I've done a couple of episodes, like I said, with a studio audience, and that was great fun. The only reason, honestly, that I haven't continued to do that is because one of the things I love in this profession is that I have complete flexibility as to when and how I record the show. And so that flexibility to me trumps having a studio audience, because, I can schedule recording a show whenever it's convenient to me. Whereas if I was doing it with an audience, that needs to be planned. That takes time to, and obviously some effort to make that happen. But yeah, it was an enormous delight to do the live shows.
Where did the in-studio guests come from? Were they fans of the show that came in?
Actually, it was a couple of years ago, and it was two of my mastermind groups that just happened to kind of, we don't do this now, but they happened to cross paths at the same time. So there was actually about 40 people in town at the same time. And, it was like the perfect storm. And then it was that realization. I thought, oh, actually, that would be really cool to record some episodes. And so, and they loved it. It was really fun. And you can see those episodes. I forget the number, but they're probably around 120-ish mark, something like that.
Yeah, you can give them to me later, and I'll put them in the show notes.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do. It really was.
So, tell me a little bit for the listeners who are not as familiar with the entrepreneurial culture in the UK. Is that something that's very prevalent? Maybe now, but when you were getting started, I know that here it's a big deal with entrepreneurs and this culture and all these people that you can listen and follow, and the motivational folks like Tony Robbins and I wonder, is that something that did not exist in the UK in the past, and it's just now coming up, or there was always some aspect of that when you were coming up and getting involved in a scene?
It definitely existed, but I would say the UK has always been a little behind the States in terms of those things. What we see happen in the States, I think typically will go to find its way to the UK and Australia and other English-speaking countries a year or two after it's happened in the States. when I was growing up, it was mostly pre-internet. So that, of course, changed a lot of things. So the way that you would hear about these things would be very different. Typically it was more direct mail offers or sometimes TV commercials. So although people like Tony Robbins and other business trainers would come to England and do presentations and so on, it was much more difficult to hear about them. And that really wasn't, that wasn't really a world that I was familiar with at that time. So I was sort of, looking back, I'm aware that it was going on, but most of my entrepreneurial journey happened after I'd moved to the States. But it's been my observation, in terms of what I mentioned earlier about England being a little behind. I think fundamentally there's cultural differences too. I think that my perception has been that the States is a far more friendly environment to entrepreneurs. It's much more encouraging. For some reason, the British mentality as a generalization is a little bit critical of people that have had a lot of success in business. I don't know why that is, but it tends to be that way. Particularly in the media, they tend to be critical of that. Whereas there's more kind of encouragement, I think, for entrepreneurs in the States. That's definitely been my observation and experience. But there is still a good entrepreneurial climate in England. There's, British people tend to be quite understated, so they don't blow their trumpet, as it were, in anywhere near the way that you will find most Americans do, which I think is, again, an interesting observation. That's just a cultural difference. The British way is to be quite reserved and to be, it's definitely not to boast. One of the things that I've had to learn to do since being in the States is to be more, what's the word? A bit more
outspoken, or?
Yeah, a bit more outspoken about my skills and achievements, whereas I wouldn't do that in England because it's not viewed in the same way. It's a bit frowned upon culturally to do that. Like almost like you're being a bit arrogant. Yeah. But actually Americans want to hear that. They want to, if you've made achievements, they want to hear about it. They don't view it in a negative way. They're like, oh, that's great. Well done. Cool. So that's, of course, I'm speaking, these are generalizations, but I've definitely found that to be the case. So it is interesting. So I have had to adapt to the American audience because most of my viewers and customers are now from the States, including Canada. And so that's who I'm targeting. But, one other cool thing about that is that it's actually easier for me to do that, to stand out in this marketplace because I'm from England. It's a lot harder to be a celebrity in your own backyard. You may have heard that kind of expression, and it's true.
Yeah, it's true.
I do stand out more naturally because I'm from England and because I have a different accent and so on. It's just one of those things. So I've definitely become aware of that, and I do use it. I leverage that.
Did you have hopes of being a BBC cameraman when you were in school?
Yeah. I definitely felt that was the course that I wanted to pursue because I was so interested in the technology. I was working with cameras even when I was at school, and so I knew that was what I wanted to do. But at the same time, it's probably important to state that I was also an entrepreneur. I loved making money on my own. I loved the business studies classes at school. I came top of the year in business studies. And so there was definitely a sort of a parallel path that was happening. On the one hand, I was very interested in the technology, and I loved this world of making videos and TV productions. But at the same time, I was always an entrepreneur. I was always fascinated by different ways to make money, and I was always keen to do things where I would be in control of my own business. So, although I was doing a lot of work for the BBC, I also worked for other production companies. It wasn't exclusive, and effectively I was my own boss. So I had kind of dabbled with employment, but like most entrepreneurs, I quickly found that I was pretty much unemployable because I just fundamentally would disagree with the business owner's decisions. I felt like I knew better. Of course, I was young at the time, so, I wasn't always right, but sometimes I was. And I would just get so frustrated at some of the silly decisions that were being made. And also, honestly, the way that most employees that I was working with were pretty lazy. And, I'm a hard worker, but I want to be rewarded for my hard work. Mm-hmm. And employment isn't the way to do that in most cases. Many companies have some kind of career ladder, but it's not always done very fairly. So taking matters into your own hands is the only surefire way that you can control your own destiny. So I realized that fairly early on, and that's why I had these two kind of parallel paths that existed along the journey of my my work.
Would you say that your parents supported you in your endeavors?
They were very supportive. I feel very happy to have come from quite a stable background family-wise. A lot of people I know struggle through all kinds of different scenarios. I had a very stable family life, and my parents were very encouraging. Neither of them were entrepreneurs, and so they did kind of find it a little difficult to understand what I was doing, but they were supportive, and I really appreciate that because I think it makes a big difference. I think that especially when you're younger, because we in England we leave school when we're 16, mm-hmm. and those kind of formative years, everybody's very impressionable, and you shape a lot of your views about the world and about business during that time, and that's why I am very grateful for my parents being encouraging and saying, whatever you want to do, if you believe that you can do it, then you can do it, and we'll support you. That absolutely, I'm convinced, had a very, very positive impact on me.
Besides your parents, was there a relationship with another teacher that you recall fondly?
Yeah. Certainly at school, there were a couple of teachers who took an interest in the fact that I was taking an interest in their classes. The foremost one, of probably no surprise, but it was business studies, because I felt like, being that kind of thinking introvert, I was very analytical at school, and there were plenty of subjects where I would think to myself, I honestly don't see the connection between why we're doing this and real world. And to this day, I still feel the same way. But business studies was the standout one, because everything that we were taught in that class had an absolute direct correlation with living your life and also building a business. And many of the skills that I learned in that class, I used to that day. It was extremely practical. And for that reason, I loved it. I poured my heart and soul into that class because I could immediately see, being a very logical person, the benefits of what I was learning. And so there were, I think it's just a natural thing that you would expect to happen. The teachers saw that I loved it, saw that mm-hmm. I was passionate about it. And so they continued to, want to mentor me. And it was a really good thing. And, it's something I'm passionate about today. I'm always looking for people to mentor, and anybody that displays the right attitude to me and that asks for my help, I will always help them because, I feel like it's a way that I can give back. I feel like it's kind of a way of paying it forward because I realized that those, the ones that did it for me, it made a profound impact on me. So it doesn't matter where someone's in, or it doesn't matter where someone is in their life, for me, financially or any other circumstances in their life. Just fundamentally, if they are passionate and willing to work hard, willing to put in the effort, willing to follow my direction, I'll happily help them, as much as I possibly can with my time and, other support. And I do that. And I get great satisfaction from it, for that reason. So it's what irritates me is people that ask for that kind of help, but then just don't do anything, or that complain. And there's a difference between some people have good reason for negative mental thoughts because of perhaps the way that they were treated when they were growing up and so on. But it's very easy to establish what the reasons are. And if someone's just a negative person and a complainer and or always questioning what you're asking them to do, it's very difficult to work with that type of people because they drain energy from you rather than giving you energy. So, I hope that makes sense. But it's something that I'm passionate about, is paying it forward.
Yeah, I get the sense, from the conversation we had in person and from the way you're describing the pleasure you get in helping someone move from a position where they didn't know a lot about a specific issue related to business or being an entrepreneur. And because of your experience, you're more than happy to help them, assuming they're willing to meet you halfway. Is that something that you just remember, if just going back to when you were growing up? Is that something that you were taught, or is that just inherent in your nature?
I do believe that, for one thing, it brings me happiness. It makes me happy to see others, that I can help others in that way, just as others helped me. And I think another aspect of it too is the fact that to see someone's life changing as a result of implementing, just really supporting them or giving them strategies that work. Knowing the fact that it can and will change someone's life is a very powerful thing. I've been at both ends of the spectrum. In the past, I've been in circumstances where I've been broke. I mean, I didn't come from a wealthy background. I came from middle class family background, and everyone around me was of that same type of background. But when I started to become successful financially, I realized that it's absolutely not about who works the hardest. That's for sure. Because there's many, many people that work way harder than I do that are earning a fraction of what I do. So having that realization that if someone has the right mindset to begin with and is willing to learn, but they just are struggling to find the right path for themselves to take, I get great satisfaction from helping them because I know that it's going to make a big difference in their life. And I know that, and I know that they're going to do it too, because it's extremely frustrating to know that someone can change their life, but to see them not willing to do it or having some other barriers, whether mentally or emotionally or, whatever else it is, that stops them being successful. That is extremely frustrating because, you want to get hold of the person and shake them and say, come on, you're so close to having the freedom that you obviously want. But, it's the old saying is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
I think it sounds like part of the frustration stems from the fact that you you can see something in them in terms of what they're capable of if they would just, go that extra mile or apply themselves a little bit more. And I think maybe, is that what's frustrating you, that you know what they're capable of?
I can see, I'm not, discernment is not one of my best qualities. It's something that I am constantly trying to develop. There are a lot of people that are way more discerning than I am, but I can typically discern whether someone has the raw skills and abilities to make something, to be successful in business. What I can't discern usually is the emotional and mental blocks that many people have, unless I really kind of get into that deeply with them, and often there isn't the circumstances or time to do that. And I think that's fundamentally the frustration when that happens is, perhaps the realization for me of, when we get to that point, because I see them not taking action or not implementing, the frustration of, you're so close, but you have to get past these mental and emotional issues first. And sometimes I'll point people to resources, but again, they have to be willing to, first of all, accept that they need help. And also, secondly, be willing to actually accept the help and take action to, to make these changes. I've got a good friend locally who came from a very, very bad background. He was abused as a child, in an environment where his parents were heavy drinkers. He was physically abused. They were doing drugs and all the rest of it. Terrible family environment. Eventually, he was put out for adoption. And he was adopted, and he ended up in a nice environment. But by this time, he was in his mid-teens, so most of the early shaping of his life had happened. But the interesting thing about him was that, for whatever reason, and I don't begin to understand what the difference is, but for whatever reason, he made a conscious decision that whatever happened to him in the past wasn't going to dictate his future. And so he started changing his mindset. He started consuming a lot of positive information that changed his mental view of things. Also realizing that just because he had that circumstances, it doesn't mean that everybody is like that. Getting past these belief systems that were actually quite ingrained at that point. And ultimately, the guy's now in his 40s. He became a top executive. I won't name the company, but a very famous software company, where he's in a very high-level position, high-level executive, having achieved great success. So, people can change. People can, even with the worst circumstances, they can change. But fundamentally, what I've realized is it can only come from themselves. You can support them, you can nurture them, but they have to have this mental adjustment that goes on in order for them to be successful, and only they can trigger that mental adjustment. There's nothing anybody can do to force it from the outside. It has to come from within. But if they do that, and if they make that adjustment, and there's work involved, of course, the sky's the limit, because they are right. That what my friend realized is absolutely right, that the past doesn't dictate the future. Mm-hmm. The past is the past. The future is an open book. You have the ability to write what's going to happen in your future. You have the ability to go wherever you want it to go. It's entirely within your power. But sadly, many people feel so so broken that they feel as if everything is already mapped out for them, that it's almost like destiny. Well, I'm just destined for this life, which absolutely isn't true. Mm-hmm. But that sadly is the way that that's the way that it often happens.
I imagine people like that have the best success when they do apply themselves, because they've almost demonstrated that they've have the internal fortitude to make it over an upbringing that wasn't ideal, and they have that spark. And so once they demonstrated to themselves that they can be successful in smaller tasks, and that they get bigger and bigger in bigger endeavors. I think to your point, your friend is now a successful executive at a company, and I think what part of what was in his past he didn't let define him, and which was really important.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the contrast between where they were and where they are and where they know they can be is so great that actually that's inherently a very huge driving force for them. It's almost like proving to themselves or proving to the people that damaged them in the past, look, I can overcome this. And in some cases, it's actually proving to them, look, I'm not the useless person that you claimed I was. Mm-hmm. There's many different things that drive people, but that type of environment actually can be an enormously powerful driving force. It's like the great book, Start With Why, Simon Sinek. In any business endeavor, it's your reason why you're doing it that is always going to be the biggest driving force. And so for people that have been in those bad situations, that often is one of their biggest driving forces. It's a huge motivator to say, excuse my language, but screw you.
Yeah.
Look, all of that bad stuff that happened to me and all those accusations that you made and all those ways that you criticized me absolutely weren't true. You're the liar. Look at what I've achieved.
Yeah, and it's pretty powerful when you can demonstrate that you've come to that realization on your own, and you've decided that that's like the next step that you want to take in your future.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That's pretty powerful stuff. What have you changed your mind about recently?
Oh, what a good question. What have I changed my mind about? Let me think about this. I think one of the things that I've changed my mind about, and it's partly through my continuing journey, is that there was a time when I felt like I had the ability to learn any skills that were needed in business. And while I still believe that's true, what I've changed my mind about is that not only the fact that I shouldn't be doing that, but also taking it a stage further, the best way to grow my business at this point is for me to act like a CEO, mm-hmm. rather than the person that's actually doing everything. In fact, I've got a quote up on my wall behind me that says, focus on the what and the who, not the how.
Yep.
And that kind of guides me now at this point. So that's something that I've changed my mind about, because, like I said, I've always believed that anybody can learn any skill. Any kind of normal person with an average ability, if they put their mind to it, they can learn any skill. I do believe that. But just because you can doesn't mean that you should. Yeah. And now, so there are still things that I actively functionally do in my business, but what I've changed my mind about and I'm getting away from is actually it shouldn't be me that does those things. I should have a team that I delegate those things to, because my biggest strength is the high-level strategy, understanding the whole business, knowing what needs to be done, and then not focusing on how it's going to be done, but focusing on who is the person that's going to do this. So what I've been trying to do is surround myself with a team of experts who are better, much better, at doing all of these different roles than I could ever be even with a lifetime of practice. And since doing that, it's really made a huge impact in my business. Now, I would say that as a clarifying, it is part of the natural evolution. I don't think that someone could just start a business and immediately do that, because I think you have to have some understanding of different roles in a business to sort of lay the groundwork, as it were. But I do believe that, the natural next step should be to become a CEO, for want of a better expression, to be the one that governs what happens and who does it, rather than actually doing it themselves.
Yeah, it's something I've definitely come to I've come to that realization as well with my own business. It's what my coach calls focusing on your genius.
Yeah, so, your core strengths. It's what strategic profits, strategic coach, I should say. That's what they teach is leveraging your core. What are you better at than anybody else?
Exactly.
That's what you should be focusing on.
I couldn't agree with you more. What's the one most misunderstood thing about you?
I think in my dealings with people, I think that a lot of people who don't know me, who just have kind of a surface interaction, can feel that I come across a little harsh, maybe a little Simon Cowell-like. But some people have actually said they find me intimidating, which actually makes me laugh. But I think that's born of the fact that, number one, I am an introvert, and so most of my processes are internal rather than external. And I think extroverts can often express things, differently. So I think that's a misunderstanding, because actually I do love people, and I'm very passionate about helping them, but I'm also very honest, and I want, if someone's genuinely interested in getting advice, I don't want to lead them down a path that isn't going to help them.
Sounds like you're also willing to give people the benefit of the doubt.
Oh, absolutely. I try to treat people as I want to be treated, and but yeah, I think just to your question, I think that's probably one of the ways that I'm misunderstood is, and I think everybody that does develop a relationship with me, they quickly get to understand who the true person is inside me. And I'm actually quite in some ways I'm quite shy, and in some ways I'm quite I have a very soft heart, actually, but that doesn't always come across in a business like first interaction or two.
When's the last time you laughed out loud?
When I laughed out loud?
Yeah.
Oh, every day. I love for humor to be a big part of my life. So I'm always consuming humor in different aspects, and also trying to, put it out there too. I mean, this has been actually quite a serious conversation compared to many that I do, but that's just the nature of where it went.
Yeah.
But humor is a big part of my life. Yeah, I'd love to laugh.
What's something funny you consumed recently that you could share with us?
Oh, I actually went to a Brian Regan concert. I don't know if you know, or I've heard of him. He's
a comedian, yeah.
Yeah, I really like him because I like clean humor. I'm not a big fan of comedians swearing a lot. I think that's kind of lazy in terms of humor. And so Brian Regan, I think, is extremely clever. I love the self-deprecating style that he has. And so I went to see him locally in a concert. Actually, it was a big arena show, all new material. And it was just phenomenal. And interestingly, too, he wasn't afraid to go down a couple of quite controversial paths, which I found quite fascinating. One was he talked about the elections right now, and of course, political candidates in a very humorous way. But the other one was he talked about guns, which is a very polarizing issue, and it's one that I I don't get involved with, because it's still kind of foreign to me, coming from England where we don't have guns anyway. I'm still kind of understanding it. But the fact that he addressed those two subjects, I found quite fascinating, that he was willing to sort of take those head on, and he wasn't divisive with the audience, but he also didn't shy away from topics that are quite polarizing.
It's a unique skill for a comedian to be able to do that, entertain people and still inject a bit of social commentary. I think some of the best ones do that very well. So I definitely appreciate you taking the time to go in a little bit deeper and let the listeners know a little bit more about you. I'm not sure if that's the conversation you had in mind.
Well, of course, as you had stated up front, we never know what direction it's going to go in. But I've really enjoyed it, because these are sort of topics that I don't normally get to delve into with a typical interview. It's very kind of surface about my show and how I develop the show. But, to get into these deeper topics as an introvert, I love that. I love delving deep.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and for sharing with us. It's definitely something that I don't take lightly. And, when guests, give me an hour plus of their time, I imagine there's, especially someone as busy as yourself, I'm always very, very appreciative. So thanks, Andrew. So what's the best place for folks to track you down online?
Well, the hub of my activities is helpmybusiness.com, and that's where everybody can watch the show for free. Usually there's a new episode every week. We're up to in the 200s now. And, if you especially if you resonate with British humor, which is very dry, then I think you'll enjoy the show. I do appreciate it's not everybody's cup of tea, but you'll also learn, if you have a business yourself or you're in the throes of starting a business, you're going to learn a lot of practical things about how to grow a business. So it's humorous, but it also has a lot of substance to it, and it's very practical. So thanks for asking. Yeah, helpmybusiness.com.
Yeah, and for the listener, I'd highly recommend you give a couple of episodes a try. It is entertaining. Andrew definitely takes the time to educate and entertain at the same time, which is always, it's not that easy to do, I imagine.
It's something that we've worked hard at. We've got a couple of writers now that came from the Letterman show.
Oh, nice.
And we put an enormous amount of effort into each episode. So, we believe that we should give our best, and so we do. The shows aren't off the cuff. They're very heavily scripted, but in a way that hopefully comes across that is very entertaining and that doesn't sound contrived. It's playful, it's fun, it is quirky, and definitely has that British humor in there.
I loved in one of the recent ones you took the $100 gold donut and were able to turn that into an explanation of how it's okay to charge premium pricing for your products.
Yeah, that was extraordinary. That stemmed from a news item where a company, or I think it was a bakery in New York, was selling a donut, literally a donut, for $100. And so I broke down what they did, how they did it, and I applied that lesson to business owners, of course, with the humorous take on it. But yeah, so I'm always looking out for quirky news stories and things like that, because that's what kind of makes it fun, is when someone watches and their jaw drops, like, what did he just say? That kind of thing. I love that.
Very good. Well, if for the listeners, and it's for the listeners and for the watchers now, since it's going to be video, I highly recommend you give a couple episodes a try, and hopefully you get some new fans.
Thanks, Harry. Really appreciate it.
Take care, and I hope you have a fantastic day. So you see, was I wrong? Was that not entertaining? Did we where you thought we were going to go? You never know with these conversations. I think it's just a function of paying attention to what the guest is giving you and just feeding off that and just listening intently to where you think a follow-up would be in order, and asking the appropriate question. And so it's just something that I try to get better at with each individual episode. And I hope you enjoyed where this went. I really wanted to learn a little bit more about what inspired him, what inspired Andrew, and like really where that seed for helping people, that drive to want to encourage and teach others comes from. I'm really fascinated when I meet people who take a real passion, or have a real passion for educating and making other people's lives better. And that's something that Andrew is definitely doing with the show and with his business. So I was really honored to have the opportunity to meet him and get to know him a little bit better. So Podcastica is the network that we are a part of, that I am a part of. If you're new to the show, you may not be aware that we are now a collection of 10 podcasts: The Walking Dead cast, Under the Comic Covers, Podcast Junkies, Radio Film School, Once Upon a Podcast, who just celebrated 100 episodes. Congratulations to Amanda and Brittany. Game of Microphones, which I'm going to be paying close attention to now that Game of Thrones is kicking in next week. The Sci-Fi Movie Podcast, the One Mind Podcast. The podcast producers are our newest members, Corey and Jessica Rhodes, and the Evil Dead cast. So we've got, for people that are familiar with Podcast Junkies, you know that when I joined Podcastica, I think there were only 6 podcasts at the time, or maybe 7. So it's been fun to watch the network grow, and we've got some other shows we're looking at intently. I think we're really happy with the family that we have, and I hope you get a chance to check it out and try out a new show that you might not have heard of, and see if it's something that strikes your fancy. I know that Radio Film School had a recent series on Quentin Tarantino, which is really, really cool. And there was another bonus episode where Rem from Sci-Fi Movie Podcast jumped in and had a nice conversation with Ron Dawson on that. So check those folks out, podcastica.com. Our music is composed by Intro and Outro. I'm reading this on my Evernote, and I was going to say music composed by Intro and Outro. Intro and Outro music composed by Cedar and Soil. Check them out at cedarsoil.com. And all the information around this episode, a lot of links mentioned by Andrew. You can check it out at podcastjunkies.com/87. So please do that. Please support the show. Please engage with me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Everywhere it's Podcast Junkies except Twitter, podcast_junkies. If you made it this far, you're searching for the retention hashtag. And we're going to go with Locke Live. So it's Andrew Locke was the guest. And given that it's not exactly a live show, but it is a video podcast, I thought, and he has had a live episode, so I thought it was a nice alliteration, if that's the right word, Locke Live, LOCKLIVE. And his Twitter handle's Andrew Locke, ANDREWLOCK. So tag him, tag podcast _junkies. I'm tongue twisted today. How are you guys doing? I had 2 interviews today, so I feel like I'm not rambling, but just talking like nonstop without taking a breath. And I'm really happy that you're listening right now. I think you should know that. I think you should like literally pat yourself on the back, because I can't pat you on the back and I can't give you a hug. But if I could, I would. I love all my listeners. I love the fans that comment on social media, and I'm just happy that what I'm doing is being enjoyed. I would say impacting. I don't know if it's be so dramatic as to say it's impacting people's lives, but I think hopefully at the very least it motivates you if you don't have a show, if you're just a fan of two human beings engaging on a consistent basis and showing you the the good that's out there, the good things that people are doing, and the cool people that are out there. I hope you're meeting new personalities, and I hope as a result you go listen to their shows. They would really love that. So I think if you have done that, then let me know. I'm always looking for feedback. As you might imagine, this is a labor of love, and we're always looking for feedback to see whether we're on the right track. If something resonated with you, I encourage you to let me know, but also to let the hosts of your other favorite podcasts know. I know I've said this occasionally, but it bears repeating. We love the feedback. We love the comments, both good and bad. There's always room for us to grow. And if something I said resonated with you, then let me know this week. Have a fantastic day, and we will get together pretty soon. What do you say in about a week?